Early in November 1899, Wyatt Earp left from Nome, Alaska, aboard the ship called the Cleveland. After 9 days, he had arrived in Seattle, Washington, with his wife, Josephine Sadie Earp. Upon arriving in Seattle, the Seattle Star on November 25th stated, "The clique of boss gamblers in Seattle is badly disgruntled over the threatened appearance of an ex-Arizona sheriff in the role of a competitor. He proposes to go into the gambling business here with a partner, defying the Considine Combine and absolutely refusing to pay tribute to John or the city officials." The "man of great reputation among the toughs and criminals," as the Seattle Star described, was much different than the reaction of the Seattle Daily Times gave when they featured only a small article about Earp, calling him a bad villain and a desperado. Possibly Earp's first appearance in Seattle was October 1897, when he stayed overnight after traveling from Alaska to San Francisco. He stayed that night at the Occidental Hotel. Earp was perceived somewhat negatively in the media since 1896. During a boxing fight that year, where Earp was a referee between Tom Sharkey and Bob Fitzsimmons in San Francisco, Earp proclaimed Sharkey to be the winner. The issue amongst many was that Sharkey was knocked out by Fitzsimmons. Earp, along with a handful of others, was accused of fraud and written negatively by numerous media outlets. Earp soon after fled to fame to focus on living a more subtle life before going to Alaska. When Earp arrived in Seattle, his plans were to open a saloon and gambling establishment. He had previously seen gambling houses such as the Standard, White House, and Clancy's making a lot of money, and saw the potential in Seattle. John Considine at this time was the Seattle kingpin of gambling operations, and he felt threatened with a man of such stature coming into town. Although gambling was illegal, Considine owned 3 gambling operations and worked with Police Chief C.S. Reed for the Gambling Trust. Gambling became illegal in Seattle in April 1899, but after meeting with Police Chief Reed, gambling became permitted with many conditions. The conditions included no minors were allowed to participate, no drunks were to be admitted, must place door tenders, no crap or blackjack games, police will notify when fines are due, doors are to close at 3 a.m., except on Saturday night when businesses must close at midnight, and finally, no entrances to gambling games from any of the saloons. In regard to the fines, as well as hush money, the gambling houses had to pay. The city itself was making a lot of money, but also were the establishments. The gambling houses also offered many jobs for the city's economy. Earp's gambling house employed nearly 50 people after opening. Wyatt Earp teamed up with local Seattle gambler Thomas Urquhart to open the Union Club Saloon and Gambling south of Yesler Street in an area then known as the Tenderloin. The Seattle Star stated that Earp and Urquhart chose the building of the old California Club on Washington Street. Earp, being someone whose reputation labeled him as a fearless man, did not give in to Considine's intimidation efforts. After at least one of Considine's representatives visited Earp and told him he should consider looking outside of Seattle, they then mentioned if he was insistent in staying in Seattle, that he needed to contact Police Chief Reed. Considine assumed Reed would have told Earp he could not open any establishment. The Seattle Star on November 11th stated that Earp told them, "You fellows are paying enough. Why should I add more money?" Earp then said, "If Reed closes me up, he will have to close you up all too. See?" Earp did apparently seek out Reed, but Reed, coincidentally at this time, was taking an extended vacation, and Earp was too impatient to wait for his return. After expenses, Earp and Urquhart's Union Club Saloon was projected to make profits beginning at $15,000 a month before they officially opened. They had planned to have 8 gambling games in their establishment. On December 12, 1899, the Seattle Star reported that operating for 2 weeks, Earp's Union Club was running 5 games. With 5 games, though, the fine from the police records showed they had to pay $175. Enforcement was selective, though. The Union Club was successful in Seattle for a few months, since they then opened until the city began cracking down on illegal gambling. The crackdown was initiated by John Clancy. The city was forced to show more of a presence once they shut down John Clancy's establishments, since he was running prohibited lotteries. He did not see it fair that he was shut down, but others were not, so he sent in complaints against the Horseshoe and the Standard, while others, including Earp and Urquhart, feared they would have to be next. The Horseshoe and Standard were temporarily shut down, but charges were not filed against the Union Club at this time, but the inevitable had to happen. The Washington State Attorney General filed charges on March 23, 1900 against Urquhart, but Earp was never charged. A warrant was served on March 23rd with the charge of conducting as proprietor a certain gambling game. Officials raided the gambling establishment and confiscated all the furnishings, including gambling equipment, and burned them in a large fire. Urquhart hired an attorney and had to pay a $75 fine. It is unsure why Earp was never charged, except for the possibility he had already left Seattle, not seeing all this fighting for the Union Club to be worth the hassle. Urquhart continued to operate the saloon after Earp had left and settling his fine. Being unsure when exactly Earp left Seattle, he was not mentioned in the media again until April 30th, 1900, when he was in San Francisco and being drunk got knocked out by another resident. He resided shortly in San Francisco before returning to Alaska, which was likely the last time Earp had been in Seattle. He boarded the SS Alliance in Seattle to return back home to Alaska.